Alrighty, okay. Welcome back, folks. How you doing? It has been a little while, a lot of miles since we've been able to meet up. We just took our little biannual trip from Turkey to the US. We'll be here for the next 6 months and then we're headed back. But I am in the process of getting set up. As you can see, it looks pretty bare behind me. We're just kind of throwing stuff together and getting started as we go. But I thought, hey, post-mortem for 318 and 319 finally came out. We get to look back at what went down with those two updates, what kind of stuff they have to say, looking back on kind of the different patches or the different features that came out, how they landed, how they could have gone better, how they could have gone worse. And so I thought, what better time to get started again than for something like that? So here we are. I'm going to sit back and walk through all of this in some pretty strong detail with you and take a look at what 318 and 319 brought us, both good and bad. I've got the 316 postmortem up as well, which is the last one that we got, just for kind of some comparison if we want to, and a letter from the chairman for a little surprise appearance later on. Now, keep in mind, as I said, yeah, this is a look back at these updates, what went wrong, what went right, but they're usually lacking in a lot more detail, I think, than what we would hope for from something like this. So don't get your hopes too high. This will provide some decent context to the updates, but it's not going to be anything groundbreaking. It's not going to rewrite our expectations of how the game will go moving forward or anything like that. It's always with a grain of salt. Anyways, let's jump in. So with 318's launch, as many of our players experienced, we launched 318 on March 10th of this year, and alongside a bevy of high-profile new features like salvage, the Vulture patch flyable ship, the surprise Scorpia Centauri's, new rivers, and new missions, the biggest headliner of the patch was our delivery of the persistent entity streaming, which completely rewrote how we save state in the game and ushered in the beginning of the promise of a truly persistent universe where a player's actions could remain in the game for others to interact with and create a lived-in environment where you could literally leave your mark in the PU. These releases, the sentences are so long. Always. I feel like I'm running a race when I'm trying to do these. Like, I gotta pace myself. Okay. And just as importantly, PES was the necessary final stepping stone to deliver static server meshing. They're not overselling how big a deal PES is. This, in my opinion, while it's good, we're going to have tons of fun with making jokes about 318 and the release of it and PES and all this stuff. Doesn't seem to be that big a deal right now, just looking at the game as it plays out in front of you. But in terms of what they can start to do with the game, how they've been able to change the game, it's a big deal. Like, they have to reach some point at which the engine is actually stable enough for them to start just kind of loading content onto it. And this is a huge part of doing that. I mean, server meshing is, what we've been told a lot over the years has been a big part of holding things back. And PES was kind of the first proving grounds to show us, can you actually develop this technology you're talking about, and can you release it? Now, obviously, that first month or two was pretty bad, but since then, especially with the 320 PTU, let's hope that it launches to live feeling pretty stable. It's recovered. So we're on this new system. They are now able to start to develop the game in this new way. And we're right back where we were before 318 came out. In fact, we're better off because of new features and vehicles and such. But in terms of stability wise, we are right back where we were. So now we can only go up because PES ultimately is there to help the game overall improve in how it runs. Many who follow Star Citizen appreciated how consequential and important our delivery of Alpha 318 was for us in the game itself. They're like, if you were on the in crowd, then you know. Guilting us into understanding how important it was. Many teams at CIG spent most of the second half of last year finishing out persistent entity streaming. As we deployed it, we don't even need the chat. I don't know why that's up there still. That came to my head out of nowhere. I'm like, there's nobody chatting. I bet the chat window. There we go. Got you. As we deployed it to our public test universe servers for testing in December 2022, and then spent the next 3 months attempting to harden and improve it for launching to our live Star Citizen service as quickly as possible. However, when the moment of truth came and Alpha 3.18 shipped to live, the shock to the system was beyond what we had projected. We could tell. While it's true that we expected PES to create a rough experience initially as we ironed out the issues that could only expose themselves at massive scale, and we warned as much, to say that we were surprised by the depth of chaos from the PES launch would be an understatement. I'm glad that they're at least coming out and saying that yeah, that is the case. We know, everybody who watched knows, but I think it's good for them to put out some self-reflection on the fact that, yeah, we were preparing for something that was pretty crazy, but this was even crazier than we thought it was going to be. And that's okay. We get that. There's a lot of R&D going into this kind of stuff. I mean, I'm going to be putting a video out about that soon, so we'll just leave it for that. But yeah, we know things were rough. Hopefully you'll tell us a little bit more detail about why. The anticipation for PES and 3.18 was nothing short of unprecedented for us. When the patch first dropped on March 10th, we experienced our highest peaks ever for logins per minute and per hour, and had our highest number of attempted logins in a day for the first few days of launch. But they wish that had gone smoothly. We say attempted logins because, as you all know, the service was so overwhelmed by the traffic and teething pains of PES that many players could not get into the game. I was in that sentence. I am many players. As various issues stalled users throughout the login funnel. Some were stuck in queues, some couldn't get their characters to load, some were stuck at an infinite loading screen. As you can read more about it in Benoit Bougeois' account below on PES. I'm not great at his name. I usually just call him Benoit. We underestimated the multiplicative forces of going to live and now creating and persisting every entity players created through their actions, creating a load on our service that was beyond our initial forecasts. And it took weeks, if not months, to expose, diagnose, create fixes, test them, and deploy them to restore the services, all while the game was still running on live. And they must hate that. I would hate that. I mean, obviously that's the magic of being able to do all of this, is we can play the game so we want to keep funding it, but man, trying to make all this work while the game is still playable must be very annoying. We learned a lot from the launch of PES, and while we are still recovering and regret the compromised service in the first days and weeks of the rollout, it has definitely taught us a valuable lesson to value and preserve the integrity of the service more than we had in the past. That's why, as we begin to roll out the replication layer split and crash recovery, two things now enabled by PES, we will do so gradually. And as we begin to deliver server meshing, we will create dedicated testing channels to harden those new technologies further and implement standards and thresholds before we graduate them to PTU and then live. You'll start to see the ramifications of that later in the year and hear more from us later about our new approach to deploying potentially disruptive and game-changing new tech to the game's service. But it comes down to us truly committing to preserving the experience for the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, who now play Star Citizen as a live service game, albeit an alpha still in development. Millions? Give me the receipts, CIG. Millions. I want to see it. That's a bold statement. Okay, so openly stating Star Citizen as a live service game is an interesting take from them. I don't think I've seen them say that before. We all see it and know it. And while the game is, what we're playing right now, it's not Star Citizen. That may have been a great title for a video that's a little catchy, kind of clickbaity, but it's true. We're not playing Star Citizen. What we're playing right now as a live service is nothing like what we'll be playing in, I don't know, however many years as a live service. Let's say once we have 5 systems of fully dynamic economy, real dynamic events, NPCs, mission givers that are reactive to us based on reputation, all of the main gameplay systems, base building, all that kind of stuff in game won't even be recognizable compared to what we're doing right now. So it is a game as a live service, but yeah, it is alpha in development. Um, I think it's interesting that they mentioned here they will begin to roll out the replication layer split and crash recovery. This is something that we're going to talk about towards the end of the video when we go into the letter from the chairman from last year. But the replication layer split is something that they haven't mentioned since that letter. I'm pretty sure since that letter. Maybe when 3.18 came out, they said something else about it. But that's supposed to be the next step towards server meshing. And if they're just now talking about rolling that out, server meshing is going to be after that. So we're looking at a hefty wait, even now, for server meshing. I was hoping maybe we would hear something about it for Evocati by Q1 of next year. But, let's not read too much through the lines. In between the lines, whatever it is. Put some salt in your eyes. Don't worry about it. Let's talk about persistent entity streaming. The development of PES involved a diverse strike team of programmers with specialized skills from multiple areas across the core tech group and Turbulent. This collaboration was crucial in successfully building this complex system. The strike team followed aligned sprints and goals facilitated by senior engineers and producers that were supported by regular meetings. This resulted in effective communication and minimized miscommunication or technical misunderstandings. A high code quality bar was maintained by the strike team, who ensured it underwent thorough design, discussion, and multiple reviews before being integrated into the mainline codebase. The initial deployment to the public test universe and testing with the PTU community went well, setting a positive foundation for further improvements. However, this led to issues. Finally, those will be discussed below. Finally, PES system architecture and API, which are based on durable queues, proved that they can recover from the worst kind of problems safely and will always tend towards recovery. Okay. I mean, yeah, that went well. Sorry, I was just I'm just taking in the angle that they're taking this from. This is actually my first time reading this. So, what went well was the development of this. This is the development between the teams. This was a huge undertaking, one that they're not really capturing in these paragraphs. They do mention a little bit of it in this letter from the chairman last year, but this was a lot of different people working on this over a long amount of time. So, yeah, I imagine they feel that went well. The PTU testing went well as well, and prove they can recover from the worst kind of problems safely and will always tend towards recovery. It sounds like they feel like this is a good system. I was hoping that they might come out and say, like, this is something that will scale with what we need. We can say that PES is the solution we needed for the problem we had, because we've had a solution come about before and it worked at certain scales, only for them to discover that it didn't work, and it set the project back quite a bit, probably 6 to 12 months. It set them back, and we're only just now seeing us recover from that setback. So, they can't possibly know for sure if it will or will not work forever. I'm not saying they have to predict the future, but it would have been cool for them to say this is it going forward. We know this will work, and server meshing is our next step. I'm guessing that's where we are, though, since obviously they're not slowing down. Well, let's talk about what didn't go well. The research and development aspects of PES posed challenges, requiring the engineers to invent ways around unforeseen problems. I mentioned that earlier. It's not like they created this technology, right? This isn't the first time that a graph database has been used. Probably not even in a game, but it is maybe the first time it's being used by the engine that originally derived from the CryEngine. And what I've discovered more and more as I've been reading throughout engine development and how these things work, especially as it come up with discussion regarding Starfield recently, making a specific thing for a specific engine is basically making it. Like, yeah, you're not developing it as an original idea, but you have to figure out how to make it work in that environment. So as far as research and development on the cutting edge goes, that's what this is. They're developing a persistently streaming graph database into and out of a multiplayer game, which has never been done on CryEngine or anything derived from it before, as far as I'm aware. I don't think they did that for New World. So yeah, this is going to be a lot of trial and error, as we have felt on our own side. And that's not to excuse the performance that we've gotten, but it is an alpha, and I do say, hey, don't, like, if you're not ready for that kind of thing, don't play this as your main game. Be ready for it to break, because it will. And I think, at least for the next few years, that's going to be something that you have to sort of depend on being a possibility with Star Citizen. But things are looking a lot brighter than they did a few years ago. So, you know, it's always just 2 more years, right? Okay, due to the foundational nature of PES, integrating it into the Star Citizen game code resulted in significant changes that disrupted the game at a very low level. And some game teams were unprepared for the integration effort required to bring the game's systems back to parity, or to convert and leverage the new persistence layer for existing features. That's a little bit not as great. It's not fun to hear that, like, the teams just straight up underestimated or were unprepared for these things after we had already been given so many warnings of how bad it would be. But all of this is kind of arbitrary at the end of the day. I've never made a giant MMO. Maybe you have, so maybe this provides more context to you. But the things that they say here, I don't know if they are good or bad or middle of the park. Like, I don't know if their team's underestimating the work means that the work was just a stupidly huge amount for any team that would develop a game, or if maybe that team just wasn't really as versed in that area of gameplay. Or maybe they were versed in that area of gameplay, but they are mostly used to it when it comes to a co-op game instead of an MMO. I don't know, like, there's no way for me to quantify whether that's good or bad. So I'm going to continue to look at this kind of just as like a feed of information and not necessarily judge what they're saying they did good or bad regarding all of this. I'm kind of rambling, to be honest. I'm just trying to provide some context for how one might approach this kind of news. They were unprepared. What does that mean? Issues with the changes introduced by PES only became apparent during large-scale use and under heavy player load, which caused delays in identifying and resolving the problems. And features not thought to use persistence at all became affected by trivial delays, like tram system spawn queues and others. Okay, see, now that one I'm not so sure about, because we know that tram systems have been part of a huge rework ongoing with ATC and public transportation in the cities based on server meshing. So I feel like that's a pretty obvious connection there. Also, the fact that they needed to do larger scale testing than what was required from the PTU has been a huge debate going back and forth, and something that they need to fix with that cloud-based testing system they talked about. I'm not sure why they didn't implement it. Maybe it wasn't ready in time. Maybe they'll talk about that at some point here. But they need to have a way to scale up to test, because obviously they can't depend on us at all times. We don't. PTU is a lot. It's just a lot of work, all right, guys? We're sorry. You say that to the people who are literally making the game. But a lot of people don't like to download 2 copies of a 60 to 70 gigabyte game on their computer when one of those copies doesn't really work most of the time. Anyways, they also underestimated the multiplication factor between the PTU and live operations. The group had estimated a 10 times increase in backend activity, but were faced with a 20x plus increase in requests, stream message sizes, and overall activity, which caused service outages across the board during the initial launch. That's a lot of people, but they did build up the hype for 318. I mean, it was over a long amount of time, that's for sure. Regarding vehicles, PES heavily modified the way they are entitled and created in-game. This gives a better use in experience, This gives a better user experience where you can choose where a ship ends up being created, but also significantly reduce the size of the inventory global database for ships that are never used. Major issues were also discovered at scale with a third-party database engine that PES leverages for its functionality. These issues gave birth to very unstable request and response cycles, as well as heavy queuing. These issues also caused ripple effects where one database server entering a deadlock condition would cause the entire shard cluster to stop processing requests for a period. That's a lot. They did get into depth with these details. This is a major cause of the instability throughout Alpha 3.18.x until the team had identified and programmed a workaround to alleviate the effects. Additionally, multiple locking problems at scale were discovered in the global database system that would cause a periodic stop of all requests to the inventory systems. The team had to investigate and report to our vendors to determine workarounds and ultimately fixes that would prevent the database engine from locking. Can summarize that up for you as PES problems. Oops. That's what it would seem. In the engine, several shards reached previously unknown hard limits of the maximum number of allocated entities. That seems like the kind of thing you're going to want to know before going live. This forced the teams to seed and or create new shards and cycle them out, diluting the effect of persistence on those shards. See now, this is what I need to... We have not had any official word on how well this works. How long does persistent entity streaming actually keep something on a map? Has anybody set a hard limit on how long something has persisted in game without being touched? Can we drop a box and reliably come back to it 3 weeks later? That would really be something that I'd expect to see here in the post-mortem. Let's keep going, see if they talk about it. Several bugs were uncovered with error handling in parts of the login flow that bricked some accounts in different ways related to character creation. Server crash handling was discovered to take a much longer amount of time due to a new process that kicks in during the post-mortem analysis. This affected the shard post-mortem and delayed players getting stowed back to the global inventory, which could result in a player character being stuck in a shard. I believe that was the player unstowed error that most of us dealt with at some point. Okay, so what are they going to do better? What are their future plans? God, I really hope they mention something about the testing and about the limits of PES right now. All right, going forward, we'll finalize and use the new cloud test launcher to adequately stress test the game shards at scale. That's the test. Okay, that's cool. So it must have just not been ready at the time, but now it sounds like something that they can start to use for things like this, maybe in the future with things like server meshing. This tool will simulate player behaviors and allow QA and the engineers to connect multiple modified game clients to the shard. By utilizing cloud computing resources, effective stress testing can be conducted, which will help identify and address issues related to heavily loaded servers before moving to live. The team responsible for PES has now moved on to static server meshing and are embracing a transformation approach to the new project. Unlike PES, this foundational technology can be integrated into the codebase gradually, avoiding a disruptive Big Bang approach. Parts of server meshing tech are already available to the game team for testing compatibility with the game features. Combined with the cloud test launcher, this approach aims to facilitate a smoother integration process for static server meshing. By implementing these measures, we aim to enhance our testing capabilities and mitigate integration challenges, ensuring smoother delivery of foundational technologies while minimizing disruption to the game. Okay. So that's a whole lot of... That was more a future plans for major backend tech, as opposed to... I guess they already did the what went well and what didn't go well with PES specifically, but I really was hoping that they would talk a little bit more about PES itself. How is it performing for them? Is it doing the actual job that they need it to? And are they confident it will continue to do so? I feel like they don't explicitly say that. just here at this last part where they say it proved that it can recover from the worst kind of problems safely and will always tend towards recovery. That doesn't tell me. I guess we just assume that it is. But as far as like a report to the people who are financially backing what you're doing, I would have really loved a confident statement on the performance and integrity of PES. Nice to hear that they've moved on with onto static server meshing, and that they'll be able to implement that a little bit in a different way. I do think that this is going to end up being one of those statements that this is all we hear about on it. And over the next 6 months, we constantly go back to this in mystery, wondering, are they starting that implementation before 4.0 and then 4.0 comes with static server meshing? Or are they talking about the gradual approach beginning in 4.0 and then going from there? And we're going to be wondering, 3.20, 3.21, possibly 3.22, do these have bits and pieces of static server meshing? Are they going to tell us that they do? Are they going to follow up on these statements? I'm hesitant to say yes or no to any of those questions, but I do think we're going to be coming back to these statements in the not too distant future. But yeah, that's their give and take on persistent entity streaming. Probably the biggest section of this whole post-mortem. Let me know what you think about that in the comments. We'll probably talk a little bit more about it maybe at this week's podcast episode. But I would hope for a little bit more, I don't want to say reassurance, just like a report on how things are going with PES, as opposed to just that the development went well and that they've overcome the problems that they saw initially. But I won't waffle on about that for too long. Waffle on. That's a funny saying. All right, Rivers, my friends, Rivers. I bet you forgot Rivers were in 3.18, huh? I did. The inclusion of Rivers marked a significant milestone in our quest to create more realistic and immersive planets. We were quite happy with the improvements to river canyons we were able to achieve between 3.18 and 3.19 due to improvements in our asset pipeline, and the support from the Planet Tech team to address technical issues during this process was remarkable. What went well? We got them in the game. I guess the work with the Planet Tech team was good, collaboration. What didn't go well? The procedural river placement tool was not in as good a state as we had hoped when we started using it, underestimated. As a consequence, a considerable amount of manual effort was required to meticulously place and verify the resulting rivers to ensure their optimal quality. Moreover, this limitation also led to a decrease in the number of rivers we were able to generate. Why not just wait then? We didn't need the rivers, right? Yeah, I don't know. Well, why rush them out if it's not ready? If it seemingly is going to cause more work? There was not a single thing tied to those rivers being in the game in 3.18. I understand that it's already past that go no go meeting and maybe it's locked into the code to the code that's going to be in that patch. Can things really not get taken out? I don't know. That's weird. What will do better in future? Butchered that sentence. The numerous issues that were successfully identified and addressed during this initial run of Rivers have already made a significant impact towards ensuring a smoother experience for next time. Although there is still considerable work ahead before we can consistently create planetary landscapes with rivers that look and feel like the real deal, we have made substantial progress and are now much closer to achieving our goal than ever before. That's too bad. It's still considerable work ahead for that. They launched Planet Tech V4, which was the initial version of Planet Tech. I know it's weird. Stick with me. It was the initial launch of Planet Tech, I believe, in 2020 with Microtech. Since then, they've been starting to work more on things like larger geological features, planetary figures that you can see from space, things like rivers, cliffside, stuff like that. And, you know, I was really hoping that by the time we got to the third system, being Nyx most likely, These planets could be producing all these locations pretty quickly along with the planet itself, but it does sound like it's still going to be a little while longer. Hopefully not too long, but we'll see. So that's the rivers. Let's move on to the sand caves, another location that you kind of forget about in 318. They hit us with the locations, but man, they did not do a great job of actually making them matter in that patch. All right, what went well? We were very happy with the results of this initial push to develop an improved pipeline to produce individual rooms for all cave archetypes and to also define the visual identity of our sand caves. So they're building on a system that has been set in stone for the last 3 or so years. And that's a big deal because this is basically they're moving from tier 0 to tier 1. Tier 1 to tier 2 in terms of caves. But seemingly, instead of going back to the rock caves and doing it with that, they've created entirely different sand caves to prove it out. So this is what they're referring to in these systems. This would be the improved pipeline that they're talking about. And all cave archetypes are the ones that will follow now that they've done sand caves. Next will be rock caves, and from there, we'll get ice caves, acidic biome caves, stuff like that. That we were able to release a first set of smaller cave systems out of the prototyping phase thanks to the concerted effort from multiple departments was the icing on the cake for us. So it seems actually that this new model with the sand was a little bit early for them, maybe? What didn't go well in the process? With neither the tools for procedurally assembling locations nor automatically placing them on planets ready for use, we had to build and place every cave manually, which was a primary constraint on the number of caves we could place on planets in the Stanton system. Unfortunately, these caves had to initially be released without missions making them into locations the players actively needed to seek out to experience, which was not great. And can we once again look at this and see that the tools they were using were not ready? This caused them to do more work. I do understand that they want to release these things as a chance to test them out with players, both rivers and sand caves, but these feel like two very good examples of things that really did not need to be in that patch and were put in just to make the patch bigger. I don't know. Both of these what didn't go wells are telling us that they were pushed out earlier than they needed to be for a non-necessary reason. And maybe they even caused a little bit more work in the process. I just don't, I'm not sure I understand why. Of all of the features in this patch, the two that didn't have any tangible effect on the patch were the ones that have this sort of issue. I'm glad that they've identified it. I'm super happy that they've communicated it to us. I hope this is something that we then don't have to read about in another post-mortem. Can we go back to this and see if there are any post-mortem acknowledgements like that? We had some setbacks surrounding the branching to releasing processes that ended up condensing the amount of time we had to release. This resulted in a last-minute rollback, rebranching to an older version instead. See, that's not really talking about them rushing the workout so much as they just lack the resources to test it. And they... Okay, this is for Jumptown too, though. That's just for a specific area. I feel like... Yeah, this is something we'll keep an eye out for in future postmortems. What they will do for future plans, though, is they are currently in the final stages of refining the new visuals for rock caves. So that would be the next archetype. That would change over all the caves that we already know to this new style. We are looking forward to utilizing the location tool to construct a wide variety of cave systems. Additionally, we will be working towards support for bigger connections, rooms, and entrances, which is a key requirement before we can replace the old caves. So even if they finish the rock caves when it comes to these small caves, they still need to make sure that the bigger caves that we have access to also are using this new system. So might not come as soon as we would hope. Next up is the PTV racetrack, a place I've only been one time because I got trolled and really never just got around to going back. What went well with it? It was created very quickly. We went into it with the idea that it was a simple location with a short time frame and minimal impact on other teams. However, we achieved a lot more in 3 weeks than we were initially expecting, with a good modular kit for kart-style racetracks and the addition of good dressing, theming, and lighting. It was really good to see how the community, especially the racing community, was excited when the track was initially shown to the public. We have since seen organized races on the track. We also got code support for upgrades to the respawning vehicle entities, so if people were to crash, break, or abandon the Grey Cat PTV, it would respawn back at the starting area of the track. We can also set the values of things like time to respawn. What didn't go well? Despite finishing the track before Alpha 3.17 was released, it had yet to have a QA pass and be bug fixed, so we decided to hold it back until Alpha 3.18. Little did we know Alpha 3.18 was going to be delayed so much, so the track, even though complete, made it into the public's hands a long time after we had hoped. What they will do better in the future. I mean, that's not really not even in their control, really. 3.18 just got delayed. We will certainly develop more modular tracks in the future, but it is on the back burner for the moment. We will try and support other similar sized ground vehicles like the Grey Cat STV in the future as well. We will also work with the mission team to look into adding a racetrack-style mission to the tracks, which will allow the tracking of race times, checkpoints, and laps, and enables the mission to give rewards to players. That'd be nice. As of right now, you take one lap around it. It's cool, novelty, but it wears off pretty quickly. Security Post Korea. Got a pretty big refactor in 3.18, I believe it was. Turned it into what actually is a dynamic mission in that you can go there and your actions will cause the universe around you to respond by encouraging other players to come and stop you. That's what we always wanted from dynamic events. So it's cool to see it in this station. Let's hear what they thought of it. What went well? We could never have imagined the level of support we received from the art team, which really rejuvenated the location. The player-triggered sandbox activity was well received, and analytics showed that hacking crime stats at Korea is still very popular, which was a concern for us as we were taking a risk removing the other hacking locations. Can't wait for real hacking to be in the game so we can see how it would actually mix up the gameplay at Korea. What didn't go well? The mission still has rough edges that need ironing out, which is in progress. Also, additional analytics needs on sandbox activities were identified to be able to further understand player participation. What they plan to do better in the future is continue to iterate on the sandbox activity and location based on the feedback we've received and add further analytics to better understand participation. Yeah, I think they're going to have to wait until hacking is properly in the game to really know how that location needs to change. All right, Jumptown. The changes to the location were very well received. Player participation was consistently very high, and the support received from art was well beyond what we expected. What didn't go well was the implementation of PES led to performance issues around the location after a lot of ships were destroyed. We also wanted to redrop the locations with Rastar, however we were unable to do it at the time due to it breaking the shops. Shops. Oh, like the drug output thingies? What we'll do better? Future plans. For the next run of global events, we're planning to redrop the locations on different planets to give different gameplay. For example, in thick atmosphere, higher gravity planets, and forests. I feel like there's more that could be updated with Jumptown than this. I only played it one time. I guess it's hard to know because we were really plagued with a lot of different issues in 3.19. I don't even remember trying it in 3.18. Invisible players were not great. I think what Jumptown needs is more reason to fight on the ground. Some kind of EMP field around bases would be cool. But that would be a whole game mechanic that they'd have to code for, so obviously that's not happening anytime soon. Alright, time travels. What time trials? What went well? The new racing content and time trial modes were well received by the racing community, helped by the content teams who produced many more tracks than we could have hoped for. In the back end, the analytics we added were fantastic and allowed us to make very in-depth analysis of each track, which helped determine where they should go on the difficulty ranking and what the target time should be. What didn't go so well was poor server performance meant that a sophisticated new system of checkpoint tracking had to be created, though the markers still do not update as responsively as we would like. Analytics also showed that relatively few players actually unlock the second track. That's good to know. They mentioned that when it comes to their quantum economy simulator, their mission tracking, they would be checking how many missions got started versus completed and how many missions just didn't even get started, and try to change missions up to be a little bit more popular for the players they're going for. It's good to see that they are tracking and acknowledging that kind of stuff. Maybe we'll see some updates to the time trial missions here in the near future. Unfortunately, those are the types of things we hear about on sprint reports, and they've stopped sprint reports basically altogether. All right, well, I don't do much racing, but I'm glad that it's in such active development now. Racing, mining, salvaging, all are pretty active in the way they're changing, as well as cargo hauling. So, we could keep talking about how things are the same as they've always been, but there was a long period of time there where there were not any professions getting regular work except maybe combat stuff. So the fact that so many different things are getting regular updates, it's good to see. It's nice. All right, infiltrate missions from Orison. What went well? The new FPS environments were well received and refreshing change after only having underground facilities for years. Yeah, no kidding. The ability to assault the locations on foot or in ships was great too. What didn't go well, we had to turn the missions off for Alpha 3.19 because we were aiming to release Siege of Orison, but we were not able to achieve this or the new platform clusters in time. So really there was just nothing in 3.19. What they're going to do in the future, we have relocated the missions to the new platform clusters and we'll be releasing them when possible. Honestly, I really would have liked to have heard about higher scale in these missions. These missions, in my opinion, are very small for what they are. I mean, you're flying all the way out to these floating islands in the sky. Beautiful locations, tons of space, all these different types of approaches you can take, and then they could put like 13 enemies in a single building. It's just such a waste of such a great location. Something that I do wish that they would have talked about here. Hey, we've noticed that players want more out of these locations. They want more AI there. That's something that we are looking into doing after server meshing makes it more applicable. Or after these missions get tied into the new building interior system. Anything like that. But, prison activities. What went well? The prison escape mission is surprisingly well played and offers a new way for players to clear their crime stats. Inside the prison, loot on the AI and new selling terminals were well received. Players felt the new AI made the prison feel more alive and it gave them another way to earn merits. Killing more people, yes. What didn't go well was the Ursa rover continued to spawn underground. Selling items at the prison kiosk still isn't reliable, and excessive AI are being spawned due to a spawn closet issue. Excessive AI in prison. What they'll do better for next time is for the next release, fix any bugs they can, including the Ursa spawning issue. Well, fixing bugs would... Yeah. Drake Vulture, what went well? Adding the long-awaited starter of the salvage career alongside its gameplay loop was a great milestone for the vehicle team. While the vehicle was started some time ago, we had held on to it to ensure it would release strongly with the gameplay loop rather than without. And this allowed the team to squeeze in some more features to the ship to make it sure it hit all the current standards. Okay. What didn't go well was a few complaints surrounding the traversal of the ship due to the gameplay mechanics were somewhat a product of the salvage mechanic evolving over time to require more manual input than initially expected during the vehicle's concept in 2018. For those of you who are avid consumers of Star Citizen content, if you saw my most recent podcast episode with Salty Mike, he mentioned something like this. If you saw his most recent podcast episode, Answer the Call, they also, him and Croncy, talked about this. This is a ship that was designed before the gameplay was figured out, much like the Apollo, much like the Reclaimer, much like the Starliner, much like the Orion. A lot of ships in this game were designed before the gameplay was able to be understood. There are good and bad reasons for this. I think it was inevitable. I don't think it should be happening anymore, but for a while there, it was inevitable based on the ships they needed to sell and the money they wanted to raise. They could have gone about it in better ways, and I do think that there are ways to get out from under this trap, but there are ships that are going to not translate super well into the gameplay they're made for, simply because nobody knows how in-depth the design of each gameplay possibility can go until it's been made, right? So a ship concepted in 2017 couldn't account for the gaming possibilities of what they would make in 2023, but they can't also go back and change that ship too much outside of what the concept was sold for, because people bought that. So it's a very difficult situation that they find themselves in. I do think that there are things they can change to remedy some of these things, specifically with the Vulture. Being able to push out more than one box of hull scraped material without having to go all the way back to the bay to move them seems like a no-brainer. It's in the trailer. It's in the literal trailer that they made for the ship. It has that capability. It makes complete sense. I really do hope that they do that, because as it is, one SCU of hull scraped material is not really worth that much, and being able to having to work on one SCU scale for that is going to be annoying. So we've already spent enough time on this, but this is a problem, and this is something that will happen with other ships at some point too. It is their challenge now. It is part of their problem to figure out how to mitigate that problem and make sure we don't notice it. What they want to do better next time, releasing vehicles alongside their gameplay loops rather than earlier in the project, see the Starfarer and Reclaimer, is something we've been striving to do in recent times and will continue aiming to do this. They have said they've wanted to do this so many times, and mostly they have done this since they started saying it more conclusively, back in, I think it was 2021 maybe. But the Argo Raft, I think, is one where they have failed on this. The 400i also, I think, it's an exploration ship, sure, but come on. Come on. Also the Odyssey, and those are more concept ships, so they can change them more, but still, the Vulture was also a concept ship up until Salvage went in. It's not clean cut. This whole situation of how they're going to make this work, it's not clean cut, and it's not fun. Someday we'll do a whole stream about it. We did just do something about the backlog. If you haven't checked it out on Space Tomato 2 on this very channel, I just put out a video. It's like an hour or so going through the entire ship backlog of Star Citizen. Why each ship is delayed, when it was introduced, when we might see it. It's an interesting one. Check it out if you haven't. All right. Scorpius Antares. What went well? The Antares was designed alongside the base Scorpius as an optional variant to put into production in the future, with the tail section of the ship outlined as the part that would be geometrically swapped. However, during the development, it was clear the needs of an EMP and quantum drive required slightly more power than planned, and the team reacted well to adjust both the base and Antares to allow the component layout to suit both. What didn't go well, there were a few technical issues that weren't able to solve that reduced the ability for the second player to have more control over pilot features and a more enhanced MFD setup. What they'll do better, with master modes and the new MFDs coming in the future, we should see the co-pilot get more gameplay features rather than being half passenger, half button presser. The problem with everything in Star Citizen is that it's introduced well before all the things that are supposed to go along with it. I think most people know that as a co-pilot in Star Citizen, your job will never just be to press one button. But that's all it is now, and for the foreseeable future. MFDs have been coming for at least 2 or 3 years. We don't know when they will be coming. I'm hoping they come in the next year or so, since obviously we need them for Squadron, but you never really know with this game anymore. So yeah, you're probably just going to be a half button pusher, half passenger for the foreseeable future in a ship like the Antares, and the way they introduced it, they should have just made the Scorpius a modular ship. But you know what the answer to that is. All right, salvage and cargo on the vehicle gameplay side. What went well? We were able to support both feature teams' introduction to key features to the PU, with salvage requiring a lot of time being spent on the art assets and cargo requiring a pass across all ships by design. What didn't go well? Unfortunately, the scope of the work for salvage was drastically underestimated. That is the third time with a major feature we've seen in this post-mortem that work has been underestimated. As we thought the existing UV2 damage of all systems used would be suitable out of the box. However, we very quickly realized we'd have to do an entire pass on every ship to up the quality, as you were looking at the visuals much closer than the damage system. Makes sense. In addition, the gameplay mechanic was built around the idea that you'd be able to 100% scrape the entire hull. However, this wasn't a consideration in the UV2 damage setup, so some areas were inaccessible, causing frustrations to early testers who couldn't 100% a ship. Okay, so definitely have seen that problem. What they'll do better. We're now more closely integrated with the teams working on big features like this, so issues can be found and investigated before development properly starts, rather than being looped in once the prototype has been completed. We've seen this with the hull munching mechanic they've prototyped. We're also, I think, getting this idea from the engineering gameplay. Salvage gameplay specifically is something that they started on the design and development process probably 2 years ago now. I would say it was probably around 2021 or so. So a lot has changed in how they're building things since they started with salvage. So I can believe this. This actually makes a lot of sense, especially considering what we've seen recently. But the cargo side of this, are we going to see more about cargo? No. Yeah, I would have loved to hear more about what their thoughts were actually about cargo manipulation here. In fact, it's really weird that there is no they just didn't even have a section for cargo refactor. There's a lot to talk about with the cargo refactor in terms of what launched well and what didn't in 3.18, what's important, what's not, what's continuing to go forward, complications that came up with box interactions, and they didn't even have a section for cargo. That is so strange. That's the weirdest part of this whole thing. They didn't even mention the cargo refactor. Item detach and attach from the tractor beam. What the heck? Yeah, that's a weird one. There's a lot to talk about there. Like they could have chosen this time to talk to us about the sacks on the moles and the prospectors and the fuel stuff from the Starfarer and how these can be, or were those updated with 3.19? Those might have been updated with 3.19. So maybe they'll talk about that later, but there's a lot to be discussed when it comes to this stuff, and I would have really hoped to see them talking about it here. All right, hull scraping. What went well? The long-awaited first iteration of salvage gameplay finally arrived with the Alpha 3.18, which enables players to scrape off hull material and either trade it or use it for field repairs. The core gameplay loop was generally well received and provided a great contrast to other activities. We also expanded the harvestable system with shipwrecks and salvageable metal pieces, and introduced the first miniature version of crafting by allowing players to create a few select items using RMC. Releasing hull scraping alongside the Drake Vulture meant that the ship could come out with proper gameplay system, and the Aegis Reclaimer finally has appropriate gameplay available to it. But what didn't go well? A lot of features and systems hull scraping was relying on were still in active development when we were building the core gameplay system. This meant the feature was handed off to the EUPU team with a fairly compressed timeline for release. We addressed the way, so again, I said it started 2 years ago, but it's hard to know when they say things like this. We addressed the way players would find salvageable objects in the universe way too late in the process, and the balance work for salvageable object distribution was not properly mapped out. Not all vehicles could be upgraded to the new damage map, meaning some vehicles still won't work correctly with hull salvaging. So even when a feature like this is coming out and expected to make a big difference, a lot of times that first release of it, nowhere near what is expected or what is planned. And it's great to get to know this kind of stuff from a post-mortem, but I really do now want to see them address this in the future with another update at some point, maybe in the patch notes of 320 or 321, just talking about how the distribution of salvageable objects has been fixed, how more objects have been moved to the new damage map, that these things are being remedied. They're saying, in terms of their future plans, we've changed our approach to how early we get other teams involved, meaning that downstream teams get involved as early as the prototyping stage. Again, something that we've seen with hull munching. We've also introduced additional milestones where downstream and content teams can review and approve the progress we've made before we move on to the next stage. Okay. Moving on to 319, starting with salvage contracts, what went well? We're very proud of what we achieved. Initially, we had only expected to release with hull scraping, but we're able to get cargo and the brand new detachable components feature included. The mission was well received by backers too. What didn't go well, we didn't choose the best ships for the mission, can attest to that, as only some have detachable internal components and gold standard hulls for scraping, which we only found out after the fact. Why? And due to developer illness, the first release saw a very rough pass of cargo spawning, meaning there was no time to properly balance or verify that all items could be sold. So again, this is something that we should be looking out for in 3.20. Was this fixed? Are these things that are being solved with the new salvage contracts? Are we going to be seeing better rewards? The economy team had to change the value of ship weapons very late into development. That caused a lot of hubbub. This was necessary to balance the problematic insurance issue, which needs a further rebalance. The change meant some backers were disappointed having gotten used to higher rewards. Yep, remember that. I wonder when a further rebalance will come from the economy team. We really don't hear much about the economy team. What they're planning on doing better in the future for the next release, we'll choose more appropriate ships with detachable internal components. What about the economy stuff, though? Just conveniently missed that part. New player experience. What went well? We received a lot of positive feedback from new players that the new player experience has helped them learn the game. The visual upgrades to Area 18 have greatly improved navigation, alongside new control and contextual hints. Throughout the development of the new player experience, we've been able to make many improvements to our mission system, such as the introduction of mission persistence, which allows us to resume a mission at the last active objective if a player loses connection or experiences a client crash. That's pretty good. I get tired of restarting missions so often. What didn't go well? The mission is largely modular, but not entirely so, which means more work is needed to bring it to other locations. We didn't have sufficient time or support to teach the player inventory management or interacting with shops. I think that was a huge miss. But it'll be good to know that they're including that for maybe the next version of this that's coming to, I believe it's going to be New Babbage. In terms of the production itself, the new player experience was a cross-team initiative and as such was complicated to coordinate. Production support for new player experience changed a few times as it wasn't owned by a dedicated team. Additionally, we didn't have sufficient support to remedy the visual issues with the existing HUD elements clashing with the new control and contextual hints. What they'll be doing better, we've already started work on modularizing the remaining parts of the new player experience to reduce maintenance and allow us to bring it to multiple locations. We will also introduce additional components to new player experience such as inventory management, shopping, and more. That'll be good. I'm guessing that'll come with the next version. RSI links. What went well? The link started off as a very simplistic adjustment of the Ursa, but as we progressed, we felt it deserved more. So it ended with virtually all new geometry and materials, which paid off as the vehicle now looks the part and sits well with the Constellation Phoenix. We also managed to cram a huge amount of interactive content within the vehicle, including animated chairs, TVs, lockers, and fridges. What didn't go well, increasing the scope of work for the vehicle, resulted in the vehicle team working longer than expected, leaving less time for the other teams such as VFX and audio to do their work. What we'll do better next time? Next time we'll ensure scope adjustments are discussed with all teams and that they're not unnecessarily waiting for all aspects to be delivered to start their pass. Okay, well, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not really that interested in links, but okay. Mirai Fury. Despite its size, the Fury series is one of the most complex vehicles we've ever put into the game, requiring complex animations and state machines all compressed into a very small space frame. It was also delivered ahead of schedule. As we were so excited by the vehicle, we actually started production before the concept pass was officially complete. Vehicle features made a pass on the gimbaled thrusters to make them work as we had envisioned. This means the Car2All and Santok Yai will benefit from this in the future. The MX's blast shield was our first proper foray into integrating custom building blocks UI into the vehicle pipeline rather than reusing other assets such as door control panels. Cool. Hopefully that means it happens more now. Alright, what didn't go well? Some of the tech we needed for the thruster locations took a few attempts to iron out, and we accidentally caused other issues with thrusters on other ships, but all was solved before release. The MX was originally intended to have generic missile racks, but it was clear early on that they needed to be bespoke to prevent them from launching into the body of wings when changed for alternatives. This sadly reduces player customization, but ultimately makes it more reliable in use. That's a bummer coming from the design. What to do better next time? We're pretty happy with how the Fury and Fury MX turned out, so no specific things occurred with their development that need adjustment in the future. Alright, tractor beam, attach and detach. Finally, players are able to loot vehicles for components and weapons, greatly expanding the salvage gameplay loop. This feature also provides additional gameplay opportunities to other features, such as allowing players to swap out mining heads and modules, and provides a strong foundation for the vehicle tractor beam feature. Internally, the vehicle content team were very responsive to addressing content issues with existing components and weapons. Alright, what didn't go well? This feature wasn't originally scheduled for Alpha 3.19, so we had compressed timeline to work with. The QATR for this feature also revealed a lot of issues with content that couldn't all be resolved in time for release. So that probably means we've got a lot of fixes coming to this system in 3.20, and especially when they bring in the overall tractor beam update, which is probably going to be 3.21, but we don't know for sure. What's going to be done better in the future? We've started requesting downstream support much earlier in the process so that necessary content changes can be done in anticipation of the feature getting ready, as opposed to doing the handover towards the tail end of development. Yes, stop it with the tail end handovers. That's not an innuendo, please. No tail end handovers. Just get it all handed over at the face end, or whatever it's called. Alright, mining rebalance. What went well? The community reception has been fantastic, and we're very happy with how the release panned out. Long-standing metas and balance issues have been resolved, and mining is now a much more nuanced gameplay loop that allows for multiple strategies. Changes to tractor beams greatly benefited the mining gameplay loop by enabling the ability to swap out mining heads, modules, and pods. We also identified a better process to balance gameplay loops holistically. This was a huge rebalance. I've got a video coming out about this next week. It'll be talking about this and the combination of this and refining gameplay and how it's overall going to solidify the industrial backbone of Star Citizen. The game has progressed and grown, I think, kind of undercover a little more than we all feel it has. Not necessarily in terms of the depth, but in terms of the width of things you can do. And I think this mining rebalance was a really big turn towards them getting these things into a place where we can actually play them like this is a game and less like a tech demo. But more about that later. What didn't go well? There were some issues that we couldn't properly resolve until after the release, such as mineable rocks always exploding and the redistribution and rebalance of shop prices requiring quite a bit of back and forth between various teams before we got it properly implemented. A lot of issues and edge cases with pricing and distribution were revealed during testing that needed constant fixing and readjustment. See, they're not talking here specifically about something they said went well, which was the attachment of pods. And we know, everybody knows for a fact, that it is not, in fact, going well. It's not. I'm sorry, that really annoys me that it's in the went well category and also in the not went well category. Or not in the not went well category, because yes, it's great that we can move pods, we can trade them out, we can get them on other ships, but the ownership system makes it so difficult to sell, to refined to do anything with them if they're not also coming from another ship. And I know they can't talk too much about that here, but this isn't coming from any specific team, right? Look at the 316 post-mortem. Look at who's talking. Look at, they literally say who this news is coming from so that we can know what kind of angle we're getting it from. They're not doing that here. No, this is coming from CIG, all right? This is from the company. So if you're going to tell me that you did a good job with the pods from the company, I want to hear about the problems that the pods currently have that we can get fixed. Just anything at all for us to better understand when we're going to be able to let our friends carry our stuff. Like, it's an MMO. This is one of the most strongest deciding features of this game, is that I can mine something and hand it to a friend for them to sell. But I can't, because it's my pod, or because it's their ship, or because it was my refining job. Like, man, anything about that kind of stuff would just be so great to hear about, or at least acknowledge that it didn't go well. I digress, though. What they want to do better next time, they want to continue to improve their communication around mining with the community and keep listening to critical feedback to make mining the best it can be. And I will give them this. They have done a great job of going back and forth with the community to figure out how mining can be better. That has been a little bit of a mini success story, I think, for Star Citizen's gameplay, is how mining has progressed throughout the years and is ultimately seeming to come to, I think, a conclusion that miners are liking. That after all of this uncertainty, really what it's going to come down to now is the economy and the sort of larger game loop that mining fits into. But overall, mining as a gameplay aspect, I think, has reached a pretty good spot. Good for them. They also will be putting more trust in the data that they gather to help inform future design decisions around mining gameplay. Okay, so that is it, folks. That is all of the features that we've gotten so far in 2023, in 3.18 and 3.19. From CIG's perspective, were they successes? Were they failures? How so? And what are their plans to do going forward based on that information? I think that they could have done better with this. I think they can always do better with it. I'm glad that we have finally gotten this, especially because they brought it up and then kind of went silent about it for a couple months. But I do think there's crucial information missing from here, particularly about persistent entity streaming and how they're feeling about it. About the cargo refactor, it's not even mentioned here. And about, I think, smaller details, specifically the fact that there were so many times when they underestimated the amount of work they needed to do or rushed something into the patch when they didn't really seem to need to. These are all the kind of dirty, gross underbelly sort of stuff that happens with game development and development of any project. The things that are you don't want to hear about, but that end up happening. And I'm glad they share them with us. I'm glad we get to know that kind of stuff is happening. But as always, I hope that there is some improvement that comes with it as well. Okay, can I actually... Sorry, I re-recording this part. The persistent entity streaming bit of this kind of bugs me. Because there's actually up here, they mentioned something about hardening. Where is it? Hardening PES or something. Oh, I'm sorry. Hardening... Yeah, so... They started their testing in December 2022 and then spent the next 3 months attempting to harden and improve it. And then here they will talk about creating server meshing and create dedicated testing channels to harden those new technologies further and implement standards and thresholds before we graduate them from PTU to live. This is after mentioning the replication layer split. Now, if you go to the letter from the chairman, this is the part that I was talking about was going to make an appearance later on. Whoops. An appearance later on in this video. If you read what they say their plan is in January, this is December talking about January. First order of business is to continue to stabilize Alpha 3.18 so we can release it to live servers in January. Now, this was 2 months earlier. Obviously, they got set back. Then we will continue to harden PES, improving aspects and adding some additional quality of life features, including the ability to choose which PES shard you would like to join. This is the PES shard matchmaking feature and will be what is kind of worked on until server meshing is made to take effect. The next step after that would be separating the replication layer. Now, if we go back here, we can see that they're talking about separating the replication layer, but there is no mention of hardening PES for additional features. They talked about how they quote unquote hardened PES when they were working on developing it towards the end of last year, where they 3 months to harden and improve it after 3.18 went out to PTU. And then they also talk about how they're going to harden and improve server meshing. But like there is a disconnect going on here with the messaging surrounding server meshing, with the messaging surrounding sort of the features and the overall plan for this year. I mean, you don't really want to get me into sort of what they've said about features for this year, bounty hunting and the resource network system and AI population and Pyro, MFDs, new star map, FPS scanning and radar, flexible traversal. Like there's a lot of stuff that is not matching up super well with communication this year. And I think this was a good chance for them to talk about persistent entity streaming and maybe clear some of that stuff up, but they didn't. So who knows what's going to happen with that. But again, communication's all over the place. I'm hoping it will be remedied with CitizenCon. Something tells me it won't be, though. I was hoping we would get it to be a little bit better fixed up with this 3.18 and 3.19 post-mortem, but that's not happening either. So we'll just have to see going forward. I hope you got some good information from this, though. We're able to figure some things out for yourself, maybe get some entertainment, maybe just hang out, listen to some music, and watch me waffle on about Star Citizen. Either way, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.